The Olympus OM2 SP is a very unique camera. Like the name implies, it is very similar to the Olympus OM2, with the exception of a few differences. As the name implies, it has something known as spot metering, and it also has an additional feature known as the program mode available for this particular camera. This camera is kind of unique because the Olympus OM2 SP is sort of like a very weird cross between the Olympus OM2 and the Olympus OM4. One of the unique features that this particular camera has over the Olympus OM2 is the availability of manual backup speeds. If you have used an Olympus OM2 before, you will know that it requires batteries in order to be able to operate properly. If you do not have batteries or your batteries just run out during a shoot, what happens is that the shutter curtain will freeze up and thus you will be unable to use the camera until you find replacement batteries. For the Olympus OM2 SP, however, although it will still freeze up and unable to operate without any batteries, it has something known as manual backup speeds. These are the speeds that's highlighted in red color on the shutter ring of this particular camera. In the event that you do run out of batteries, what you can simply do is to use the manual backup speeds to continue taking your pictures until you find some replacement batteries. However, what happens is that since it's using mechanical speeds and there is no battery power present in this particular camera, you would have some limitations in terms of what you can do with this particular camera. For example, no aperture priority shooting and no light meter to assess how bright the scene is. This is actually very similar to the Olympus OM4, where there's manual backup speeds printed in red on this particular camera as well. So why would you need mechanical shutter speeds on this particular camera? Well, for one thing is that it does help you in a pinch if you run out of batteries. And for me personally, I did experience something similar where I needed the mechanical shutter speeds. So what happened was that I was trying to take some pictures in a stairwell in a particular building, and what happens is that when I was pressing the shutter button, suddenly the battery just ran out of charge at that moment. So as a result of that, my camera failed to operate. Instead, I have to quickly turn to the manual mechanical shutter speeds in order to continue taking pictures. I couldn't go to a store nearby because there was no battery shops available for me to purchase replacement batteries. So having the mechanical shutter speeds available allowed me to continue shooting at that moment in time, and I was able to take a picture that looks something like this. I remembered the metered reading before the battery was run out completely on this particular camera, so all I needed to do was to set the shutter ring to the mechanical shutter speeds and continue my shots with the previous metered readings. So what are the shutter speeds that's available on this particular camera that is mechanical? Well, if we take a look at the red color numbers, we only have two symbols that's present. One is 1/60th of a second, and the second one is bulb, where bulb mode essentially operates by allowing you to press down on the shutter button, and so long as you press down on the shutter button, the shutter curtain will remain open until you release the shutter button. So we have two speeds. One speed is 1/60th of a second, which is rather quick, and the second speed that we have is bulb, which can last you for 1 second all the way until infinity. It seems very limited in terms of the picture taking. So I was wondering whether can I actually take pictures using these two mechanical speeds only. Well, as a challenge to myself, I decided to actually go out and about using these cameras without any batteries in order to take pictures. So what I did was that I loaded up a roll of Kodak Pro Image 100, then I decided to go about in my day to take some pictures using only the mechanical shutter speeds available in this camera without any battery assistance. The two lenses which I'll be using for this particular challenge will be the standard 50mm f1.8 and the Olympus Zuiko 35-70mm f4 zoom lens, as I find that these two lenses are usually the ones that are paired with this particular camera whenever you purchase them on used markets or on eBay. I'll also be bringing along additional equipment such as tripod and a flash, which I'll be using in certain scenarios. So since my Olympus OM2 SP has no batteries loaded inside the camera, This means that a lot of the electronic functions, if not all the electronic functions, cannot be used with this particular camera. This means that there is no aperture priority, no program mode, and most importantly, there is no light meter reading present in this particular camera. So if we are taking pictures with no light meter, it's kind of like shooting blindly into the surroundings. Fortunately for us, if you are taking pictures outdoors in a sunny environment, there's something known as the Sunny 16 rule, which will assist you in order to set proper settings on this particular camera to take photos even if you do not have a light meter. All you simply have to do is to observe the weather situations that you're present when you're taking the pictures. The first step to the Sunny 16 rule is to actually set the shutter speed to match as closely to your film ISO as possible. Since I've loaded the Kodak Pro Image 100 film, a shutter speed of 1/125th of a second would be preferred. However, since this camera only has one single shutter speed, which is 1/60th of a second as a manual backup, I will either have to accept that all my pictures will be overexposed by one stop, or I just need to remember to adjust my Sunny 16 rule scale by just one stop. Color negative film tends to have some ability to deal with overexposure, so I'm alright with overexposing my photos by one stop. The next thing is to determine exactly what aperture setting that you're supposed to select. Well, using the Sunny 16 rule chart, what you simply have to do is to take a look at the weather conditions and then select your aperture accordingly. If you notice that the sky is completely clear with no clouds and a perfectly sunny day, you can set your aperture to f16. As you notice that there are more clouds, you can place in to set your aperture to f11, and you can of course continue to reduce down your f-stop number to f8 if you notice that the sky becomes even more cloudy. As the environment turns to more overcast, where that let's say it's going to rain, or you notice that the clouds are a little bit more darker, what you can set your aperture to is f5.6. Then if you notice that you're taking pictures during like sunrise and sunset situations, or it does appear that the weather is going to rain, you can set your aperture to f4. Again, since color negative film tends to have the ability to deal with overexposures better than underexposures, you can err on the side of overexposures by setting your apertures to slightly smaller f-stop numbers than necessary if you're unsure of what setting to use. The 1/60th of a second was indeed pretty useful shutter speed, as I was able to take relatively decent photos using the lens choices and the environment. Of course, there are some limitations with using the 1/60th of a second shutter speed. Sometimes when I'm shooting into the sky, I notice that 1/60th of a second is definitely not fast enough. So one of the photos I have over here, the sky area appears a little bit too much overexposure for my taste. So I had to use post-processing to reduce down the brightness in order to make the picture looks to what I want it to appear. The 1/60th of a second shutter speed also could be too slow to freeze certain motions. So there are two photos over here. One of them I've taken a photo of is the Sun Lake City fountain, and as you can see, because of the shutter speed of 1/60th of a second, the water droplets was unable to be frozen in place. So this is one limitation that I had when I was taking the pictures. Another photo that I have over here is that I was inside a bus and I was trying to take a picture. However, because the bus was moving pretty quickly on the expressway and the ride was a little bit bumpy, the 1/60th of a second shutter speed was not enough to freeze the motion, and thus my pictures do look a bit blurry in this particular case. But other than that, using that Sunny 16 rule was relatively accurate enough for me to achieve proper exposures throughout the entire photo taking journey. And I think the photos do appear very nicely. So this was kind of a very interesting experiment in order to be able to take pictures, and I noticed that the camera is not very limited. Quick side note, since the camera is unable to adjust its shutter speed, the only way that one can adjust its exposure is to use the aperture values. As a result of this, most of the photos would appear to have a very deep depth of field if the environment is very bright, but a shallow depth of field if it is very dark. If you would like to take pictures with a shallow depth of field in very bright environments, either we have to use lower ISO sensitivities for our film, or we need to attach a neural density filter into our lenses so that we'll be able to reduce the amount of light entering the camera. Now, of course, if you do have an external light meter either on your phone or perhaps maybe as a separate device that you have purchased, go ahead and use it because it will allow you to be able to achieve slightly more accurate exposures in the environment when you're taking pictures. Where the Sunny 16 rule will fail you is when you're taking pictures either indoors or if you're taking pictures at night. This is because the light source that you're using now is no longer the sun. Instead, you're using light source from artificial sources such as light bulbs, neon signs, and shop windows and other areas that are lit at night or indoors. Because of this, the Sunny 16 rule no longer works and you have to use other systems instead. Fortunately for us, this particular camera can operate the bulb mode without batteries. The bulb mode essentially is useful for nighttime photography where the exposure is going to last for more than a second. It will be useful if you have a light meter because this is where the light meter can assist you with taking pictures and exposing them more accurately. But for me in this case, since I cannot use a light meter as I don't have any batteries, I'm going to challenge myself to try to estimate and guess the exposure. For me, my guesstimate when I was taking pictures in this night scene was that if I set my aperture to f4 or above, I will open up my shutter curtain for 4 seconds. If it's around f8, I will open it up to around 8 seconds, and if it's any further than that, I'll open up for maybe around 16 seconds or so. As usual, this is a very, very rough estimate. It's not supposed to be accurate, but it does allow you to be able to achieve at least some form of exposure. So it's better to at least take the picture rather than getting nothing at all. So from this particular result, you can see my photo tends to be a little bit overexposed because as you can see there is one half that is very dark and one half that is very bright. So this is very contrasty sort of lighting scenarios. I'm alright with the lighting in the shop to be overblown and overexposed so long as I was able to get some information in the shadow area. But of course, if I had a light meter, this will not be an issue because I will be able to estimate the shooting settings accurately instead of using guesstimates like what I've done so far. If you're using the bulb mode, it is recommended that you use a tripod so that you'll be able to hold the camera steady because there's no way a person is going to hold the camera for 2 seconds or more without any motion blur. However, there is an issue when you're trying to use a bulb mode and you're taking a picture of, let's say, your friend in the environment. What happens is that we as humans can't really hold still for 2 or 4 seconds or longer. So as a result, if you try to use the bulb mode in very dark environments, if using the cable release, what happens is that you will see that because of your friend's movement, they will appear a little bit blur and the motion blur will be very obvious. Fortunately for us, this particular camera has the 1/60th of a second shutter speed that is mechanical, and coincidentally, it does tally with the flash synchronization speed that is present on this Olympus OM2 SP, where this is the fastest shutter speed that a flash can be used with this particular camera. So, I have a T20 Olympus OM flash unit, which I attach to this particular camera. At 1/60th of a second, I can actually fire the flash and I can achieve photos that look something like this, where my friend is now properly lit, and because the shutter speed was fast enough, his body motion was not captured and he was frozen in place, and thus we can achieve a properly taken photo like this. But now we have a different problem on our hands. He is properly exposed, but the surrounding environment is just pitch black. So I have no context as to where this person actually is. So this flash photography is actually what you see very often with cheap disposable cameras, which only has one single flash bulb for you to fire. So you will get pictures that look like this, where the subject is like fully blown with the flashlight, but you can't really see the environment behind you. You can also see this sort of effects in Polaroid pictures as well. So if actually that's the vibe that you're going for, then go ahead and use it. It's actually a pretty interesting sort of vibe. But if you would like to capture the background information, combine the bulb mode with the flash in order to perform something known as slow shutter speed synchronization flash. What you do instead of using the 1/60th of a second is to set your shutter speed to the bulb setting. Then next is to meter your flash unit as per normal. So with this particular flash unit, there is an auto metering system. I just need to set the aperture to the correct setting and measure the distance between my friend and the camera in order to determine the proper setting. Next after that is to take note of how long to open the bulb mode for. So in this case, as usual, I'm going to use my guesstimates in order to be able to expose the background properly. Now, when I press the button, the shutter speed button using the cable release, what happens is that the flash would fire, which will expose my friend properly. And as the shutter curtain is still open throughout the bulb mode, the surrounding light from the background will start to be absorbed by the film, and thus I now have a photo that shows the background properly lit and my subject properly lit at the same time without much motion blur. Well, in this case, I did ask my friend to sway a little bit as the photo is being taken. So you can see that if there's any movement with the subject, they can produce these very nice glowy or duplication effects with your pictures. So this is something else that you can experiment on when you're taking photos. So it's kind of fascinating actually how much you can do with these particular settings, even though you don't have any batteries in this particular camera. Quick side note, while trying to take a photo of my friend, I realized that the flash did not fire for several shots. And it was very perplexing to me because I know that I can use this flash without any battery power from the camera, as demonstrated by connecting this flash unit to the Holga camera. What I discovered was that because I have removed the batteries from earlier on, the circuit is now open and thus the flash is unable to fire. However, when I loaded in zinc air batteries which do not have sufficient voltage to drive the camera still is able to fire the flash. So this is what I've discovered. If you do run out of batteries, do not throw away the batteries out of your cameras, just leave it in there until you find a replacement in order to allow you to still take flash photos. Overall, I feel that most of my pictures were actually pretty well exposed, with only some exception occurring due to motion blur due to the limit of the 1/60th of a second shutter speed and some user errors that I had when I was taking the pictures. I kind of find it fascinating because this is a very interesting challenge to limit myself to only using 2 shutter speeds, and of course only limiting myself to using guesstimates and Sunny 16 rules in order to be able to expose the pictures properly. So I would say that this was a very interesting challenge, and it's to show that even with mechanical shutter speeds and no batteries, you can still be able to take pictures and you're not too crippled when you're taking pictures with this particular camera. Of course, this camera does have its limitations. For example, since there's only one single mechanical shutter speed, when I'm taking pictures, the depth of field tends to change in terms of how bright and how dark the scene is. I could of course modify by either using more sensitive film or maybe attaching a neural density filter in order to be able to adjust certain settings. But in its plain vanilla form, the depth of field will usually adjust itself based on the brightness and darkness of the scene. If you really want a mechanical camera, you can either get the Olympus OM1 or perhaps other cameras such as perhaps the Canon F1 in order to be able to access for more aperture and shutter speed settings without the need of use of batteries. So thank you so much for watching this video. If you have any questions, do leave them in the comments below, and I'll see you another time.